Chapter 16. In the Jolly Cricketers. The Jolly Cricketers is just at the bottom of the hill, where the tram lines begin. The barman leaned his fat red arms on the counter and talked of horses with an emanatic cabman, while the black-bearded man in gray snapped up biscuit and cheese, drank Burton, and conversed in American with policemen off duty. "What's with shouting about?" said anemic cabman, going off at a tangent, trying to see up the hill at the dirty yellow blind of the low window of the inn. "Somebody ran by outside." "Fire, perhaps," said the barman. Footsteps approached, running heavily at the door, pushed open violently, and Marvel, weeping and disheveled, his hat gone, and neck of his coat open, rushed in, made the convulsing turn, and attempted to shut the door. It was held half open by a strap. "Coming!" he bawled, his voice shrieking with terror. "What? He's coming! The invisible man! After me! For God's sake! Help! Help! Help!" "Shut the doors," said the policeman. "Who's coming? Now, what's the row?" He said. He went to the door, released the strap, and it slammed. The American closed in the other door. "Let me go outside," said Marvel, staggering and weeping, but still clutching the books. "Let me go inside. Lock me in somewhere. I tell you, he's after me. I give him the slip. He said he'd kill me, and he will. You're safe," said the man with a black beard. "The door's shut. What's that? All that about?" "Let me go inside," said Marvel, with a shrieked aloud with as blow as a suddenly made as the fastened door shiver with as followed as by hurried rapping and shouting outside. "Hello!" cried the policeman. "Who's there?" Mr. Marvel began to make a frantic drive. The panels locked like doors. He'll kill me. He's got a knife or something. For God's sake!" "Here you are," cried the barman. "Come in here," and he held up a flap of the bar. Mr. Marvel rushed behind the bar, and summons of the outside was repeated. "Don't open the door," he screamed. "Please don't open the door. Where shall I hide?" This, the invisible man, then?" asked the man with the black beard, with one hand behind him. "I guess it's about time we saw him." The window of the inn was suddenly smashed in, and there was a screaming and running to and fro of the street. The policeman had been standing on the settee, staring out, crashing to see who was at the door. He got down with raised eyebrows. "And that," he said. The barman stood in front of the bar parlor door, which now locked on Mr. Marvel. Darted and smashed window and came round to the other men. Everything was suddenly quiet. "I wish I had my truncheon," said the policeman, going irresolutely to the door. "Once we open, in he comes. There's no stopping him. Don't you be in so too much hurry about that door," said the anemic cabman anxiously. "Draw the bolts," said the man in the black beard. "If he comes," he showed a revolver in his hand. "That won't do," said the policeman. "That's murder." "I don't know what country I'm in," said the man in the beard. "I'm going to let off his legs. Draw the bolts." "Not with the blinking thing going off behind me," said the barman, craning over the blind. "Very well," said the man in the black beard, and stooping down, revolver ready, drew then himself. Barman, cabman, and policeman faced out. "Come in," said the bearded man in an undertone, standing back and facing the unbolted doors and the pistol behind him. No one came in. The door remained closed. 5 minutes afterwards, when a second cabman pushed in his head cautiously, they were still waiting, and an anxious face peered out of the bar parlor and supplied information. "Are all the doors in the house shut?" said Marvel. He's going around, prowling around. He's an artful as the devil." "Good Lord," said the burly man. He's back. He's there, the back. Just watch him, the doors, I say." He looked about him helplessly. The bar parlor slammed as they heard the key turn. "There's the yard and the door, the private door, the yard door." He rushed out to the bar. And in a minute, he reappeared in the carving knife in hand. "The yard door was open," he said in a fat under-lipped rap. "He may be in the house now," said the first cabman. "He's not in the kitchen," said the barman. "There's 2 women there, and I've stabbed every inch of it with its little beef slicer. This little beef slicer. And they don't think he's come in. They haven't noticed." "Have you fastened it?" said the cabman. "I'm out of frocks," said the barman. The man with the beard replaced his revolver, and even as he did so, the flap of the bar was shut down and the bolt clicked. And then, with a tremendous thud, the catch of the door snapped and the bar parlor door burst open. They heard Marvel squeal like a caught leveret, and forthwith they were clambering over the bar to his rescue. The bearded man's revolver cracked and looking glass in the backyard, and the parlor started and came smashing and tinkling down. As the barman entered the room, he saw Marvel, curiously crumpled up and struggling against the door that led the yard into the kitchen. The door flew open while the barman hesitated. The Marvel dragged into the kitchen. There was a scream of clatter pans. Marvel, head down and lugging back obstinately, and forced the kitchen door, and the bolts were drawn. Then policemen, who were trying to pass the barman, rushed in, followed by one of the cabmen, gripped the wrist and an invisible hand to the collared Marvel. He was hit in the face and went reeling back, and the door opened. Marvel made a frantic effort to obtain the lodgment behind it. The cabman collared something. "I got him," said the cabman. The barman's red hands came crawling at the unseen. "Here he is," said the barman. Mr. Marvel, released suddenly, dropped to the ground and made an attempt to crawl behind the legs of the fighting men. The struggle blundered around the edge of the door. The voice of the invisible man was heard for the first time, yelling out sharply as the policeman trod on his foot. Then he cried out passionately, and his fists flew round like flails. The cabman suddenly whooped and doubled up, kicked under the diaphragm. The door and the bar parlor from the kitchen slammed and covered Mr. Marvel's retreat. Then the men in the kitchen found themselves clutching and struggling at empty air. "Where's he gone?" cried the man at the beard. "Out? This way," said the policeman, stepping out to the yard and stopping. A piece of tile whizzed by his head and smashed among the crockery on the kitchen table. "I'll show him," shouted the man with the black beard, and suddenly the steel barrel shone over the policeman's shoulder. 5 bullets had followed one another to a twilight whence the missile had come. As he fired, the man with the beard moved his hand in a horizontal curve, so that the shots radiated out the narrow yard like spokes on a wheel. Silence followed. 5 cartridges, said the man with the black beard. That's the best of all. 4 aces and a joker. Get a lantern, someone, and come feel about this for a body. Chapter 17. Dr. Kemp's Visitor. Dr. Kemp had continued writing in his study until the shots aroused him. Crack, 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 they came in after one another. "Hello," said Dr. Kemp, putting his pen into his mouth again and listening. "Who's letting off the revolvers in Burdock? What are the asses at now?" We went to the south window, threw it up, and leaning out, stared down the network of the windows. Beaded gas lamps and shops with black interstices of roof and yard that made up the town at night. "Looks like a crowd down the hill," he said, "by the cricketers," and remained watching. Thence his eyes wandered over the town to far away where ships' lights shone, and Pierre glowed the little illuminated, faceted pavilion like a gem of yellow light. The moon in its first quarter hung over Westward Hill, and the stars were clear and almost tropically bright. After almost 5 minutes, during which his mind had traveled into remote speculation of social conditions of the future and lost itself at last over the time of dimension, Dr. Kemp roused himself with a sigh, pulled over down again, and returned to his writing desk. It must have been about an hour after this front doorbell rang. He had been writing slacky, and at intervals, abstraction since the shot, he had sat listening. He heard the servant answer the door and waited on his feet on the staircase, but she did not come. Wonder what he was, said Dr. Kemp. He tried to resume his work, failed, got up, went downstairs from his study and landing, rang, and called over the balustrade to a housemaid as she appeared in the hall. "Was that a letter?" he asked. "Only the runaway ring, sir," she answered. "I'm restless tonight," he said to himself. He went back to his study, and this time attacked his work resolutely. In a little while he was hard at work again, and only the sounds of the room were taking at the clock and subdued shrillness of his quill, hurrying and in the very center of circle of the light and lampshade threw on his table. It was 2:00 before Dr. Kemp finished his work for the night. He rose, yawned, and went downstairs to bed. He already removed his coat and vest, and when he noticed that he was thirsty, he took a candle and went down the dining room in search of a siphon whiskey. The Dr. Kemp's scientific pursuits have made him a very observant man. As he recrossed the hall, and he noticed a dark spot of linoleum near the mat at the foot of the stairs. He went up upon the stairs, and suddenly occurred to him to ask himself what the spot on the linoleum might be. Apparently, the subconscious element was at work. At any rate, he turned with his burden and went to the hall, put down the siphon whiskey, and bending down, touched the spot. Without any great surprise, he had found it in the stickiness of color and drying blood. He took up his burden again and returned upstairs, looking about him and trying to account for the blood spot. On the landing, he saw something and stopped astonished. The door handle of his own room was blood-stained. He looked at his own hand. It was quite clean. And he remembered that the door of this room had been open and when he came down to his study, and had consequently he had not touched the handle at all, and he went straight into the room. His face was quite calm. Perhaps the trifle was more resolute than usual. His glance, wandering inquisitively, fell on the bed. On the counterpane of the mess of blood, the sheet had been torn, and he had not noticed this before. He had walked straight to the dressing table. On further side, the bedclothes were depressed as if someone had recently been sitting there. Then an odd impression that he had heard a low voice say, "Good heavens, Kemp!" But Dr. Kemp was no believer in voices. He stood staring at the tumbled sheets. Was that really a voice? He looked about again, but noticed nothing further than the disordered and blood-stained bed. Then he distinctly heard a movement across the room near the wash-hand stand. All men, however highly educated, retain some superstitious inklings. The feeling is called eerie. Came upon him. He closed the door of the room and came forward to the dressing side and put down his burdens. Suddenly, with a start, he perceived a coil and blood-stained bandage of linen rag hanging in midair between him and the wash hand stand. He stared at it in amazement. It was an empty bandage, a bandage properly tied but quite empty. He would have advanced to grasp it, but touch it arrested him, a voice speaking quite close to him. "Kemp," said the voice. "Eh?" said Kemp, with his mouth open. "Keep your nerve," said the voice. I am an invisible man." Kemp made no answer for space, simply stared at the bandage. "Invisible man," he said. "I am an invisible man," repeated the voice. The story had already been active to ridicule that only morning rushed through Kemp's brain, as he did not appear to have been either very much frightened or very greatly surprised in the moment. Resolution came later. "I thought it was all a lie," he said. He thought upmost of his mind had reiterated arguments of the morning. "Have you that bandage he asked. "Yes," said the invisible man. "Oh," said Kemp, and then roused himself. "I say," he said, "but this is nonsense. It's some trick." He stepped forward suddenly, and his hand, extended toward the bandage, met invisible fingers. He reconciled at touch, and his color changed. "Keep steady, Kemp. For God's sake, I want help badly. Stop!" His hand grabbed at his arm. He struck at it. "Kemp!" cried the voice. "Kemp! Keep steady," and the grip tightened. A frantic desire to free himself took possession of Kemp, and the hand of the bandaged arm gripped his shoulder, and then suddenly tripped flung backwards onto the bed. He opened his mouth to shut, and corner of the sheet was thrust between his teeth. The invisible man had him down grimly, but his arms were free and struck and tried to kick savagely. "Listen to reason, will you?" said the invisible man, sticking him in spite of his pounding ribs. By heaven, you'll madden me in a minute." "Lie still, fool," bawled the invisible man in Kemp's ear. Kemp struggled for another moment and then lay still. "If you shout, I'll smash your face," said the invisible man, revealing his mouth. "I'm an invisible man. It's no foolishness, no magic. I really am an invisible man, and I want your help. I don't want to hurt you, but if you behave like a frantic rustic, I must. Don't you remember me, Kemp? Griffin, of University College." "Let me get up," said Kemp. "I'll stop where I am, and let me sit quiet for a minute." He sat up and felt his neck. "I am Griffin, of University College. I have made myself invisible. I am just an ordinary man, a man you have known, made invisible." "Griffin!" said Kemp. "Griffin," answered the voice, "a younger student than you were, and almost albino, 6 feet high and broad, with a pink and white face with red eyes, who won the medal for chemistry." "I'm confused," said Kemp. "My brain is rioting. What is to do with Griffin?" "I am Griffin." Kemp thought, "It's horrible. But what devilry must happen to make a man invisible?" "It's no devilry. It's process. Sane, intelligible enough." "It's horrible," said Kemp. "How on earth? It's horrible enough. But I'm wounded, in pain, and tired. Great God! Kemp, you are a man. Take it steady. Give me some of your food and drink, and let me sit down here." Kemp stared at the bandage and moved across the room, and then a basket chair dragged across the floor and come rest near the bed. It creaked, and the seat depressed the quarter of the inch or so. He rubbed his eyes and felt his neck again. "This beats ghosts," he said, and laughed stupidly. "That's better. Thank heaven, you're getting sensible." "Or silly," said Kemp, and knuckled his eyes. "Give me some whiskey. I'm near dead." It didn't feel so. Where are you? If I get up, shall I run into you?" "There. All right. Whiskey, here. Where shall I give it to you?" chair creaked and Kemp felt the glass down away from him. Let go by an effort, his instinct was almost against it. It came to rest poised 20 inches above the edge of the seat in the chair. He stared at it in infinite perplexity. This must be hypnotism. You must have suggested you are invisible. Nonsense, said the voice. It's frantic. Listen to me. I demonstrate conclusively this morning, began Kemp, that invisibility. Never mind what you've demonstrated. I'm starving, said the voice, and the night is chilly to a man without clothes. Food? The tumbler of whiskey has tilted itself. Yes, said the invisible man, wrapping it down. Have you a dressing gown? Kemp made some explanation in an undertone. He walked to a wardrobe produced by a robe of dingy scarlet. This do? He asked. It was taken from him. It hung limp for a moment in midair, fluttered wildly, stood full and decorous, buttoning itself, and sat down in its chair. Drawers, socks, slippers would be of a comfort, said the unseen curtly, and food. Anything, but this is the insanest thing I was in my life. He turned out his drawers for the articles and then went downstairs to ransack his larder. He came back with some cold cutlets of bread, pulled up a light table, placed them before his guest. Never mind knives, said the visitor, and a cutlet hung in midair with a sound of gnawing. Invisible, said Kemp, and sat down in the bedroom chair. I always like to get something about me before I eat, said the invisible man with a full mouth, eating greedily. Queer fancy. I suppose that wrist is all right, said Kemp. Trust me, said the invisible man. Of all strange and wonderful. Exactly, but it's odd I should blunder into your house to get my bandaging. My first stroke of luck. Anyhow, I meant to sleep in this house tonight. You must stand that. It's a filthy nuisance, my blood showing, isn't it? Quite a clot over there. Gets visible as coagulates, I see. But it's only the living tissue, and I've only changed for so long as I'm alive. I've been in the house for 3 hours. But how is it done? Began Kemp, in a tone of exasperation. Confound it! The whole business! It's unreasonable from beginning to end. Quite reasonable, said the invisible man. Perfectly reasonable. He reached out and secured the whiskey bottle. Kemp stared at the devouring dressing gown, the ray of candlelight penetrating a torn patch of right shoulder and made the light of the under the left ribs. What were the shots? He asked. But how did the shooting begin? There was a real fool of a man, a sort of confederate of mine. Curse him! Who tried to steal my money has done so. Is he invisible too? No. Well, can I have some more to eat before I tell you all that? I'm hungry, in pain, and all you want to do is tell me stories. Kemp got up. You don't go do any shooting, he asked. Not me, said his visitor. Some fool I've never seen fired at random. A lot of them got scared. They all got scared at me. Curse them, I say. I want more to eat than this, Kemp. I'll see what there is to eat downstairs, said Kemp. Not much, I'm afraid. After he had done eating, he had made a heavy meal. The invisible man demanded a cigar. He bit the end of savagely before Kemp could find a knife, and had cursed the outer leaf loosened. And it was strange to see him smoking. His mouth, throat, pharynx, and nares became visible of sort of whirling smoke cast. This blessed gift of smoking, he said, and puffed vigorously. I'm lucky to have fallen upon you, Kemp. You must help me. Fancy trembling on you just now. I'm a devilish scrape. I've been mad to think the things I have been through, but we will do things yet. Let me tell you. He helped himself to more whiskey, and Kemp got up, looked about him, and fetched a glass from his spare room. It's wild, but I suppose I may drink. You haven't changed much, Kemp, these dozen years. You fair men don't. Cool and methodical. After the first collapse, I must tell you, we will work together. But how is it all done? Said Kemp. And how did you get like this? For God's sake, don't let me smoke in peace for a while. And then I will begin to tell you. But the story was not told that night. The Invisible Man's wrist was growing painful. He was feverish, exhausted, and his mind came to round blood brewed upon his chase down the hill of struggle about the inn. He spoke in fragments of marvel. He smoked faster. His voice grew angry. Kemp tried to gather all he could. He was afraid of me. I could see that he was afraid of me, said the Invisible Man many times over. He meant to give me the slip. He was always casting about. What a fool I was. The cur! I should have killed him. Where did you go with the money? Asked Kemp abruptly. The Invisible Man was silent for a space. I can't tell you tonight, he said. He groaned suddenly and leaned forward, supporting his invisible head on the invisible hands. Kemp, he said, I have had no sleep for near 3 days, except a couple dozes of an hour or so. I must sleep soon. Well, have this room. But how can I sleep? If I sleep, he will get away. Ugh, what does it matter? What's the shot wound? Asked Kemp abruptly. Nothing. Scratched it in blood. Oh, good. How I want sleep. Why not? The Invisible Man appeared to be regarding Kemp. Because I have particular objection to being caught by my fellow men, he said slowly. Kemp started. Fool that I am, said the Invisible Man, striking the table smartly. I have put the idea into your head. Chapter 18. The Invisible Man Sleeps. Exhausted and wounded as the Invisible Man was, he refused to accept Kemp's word that his freedom should be respected. He examined the 2 windows of the bedroom. He drew the blinds and opened the sashes, and to confirm Kemp's statement that a retreat that by them would be possible. Outside, the night was very quiet and still, and the new moon was setting over the down. He examined the keys of the bedroom and the 2 dressing room drawers to satisfy himself that these could also be made assurance of freedom. Finally, he expressed himself satisfied. He stood on the hearth rug and Kemp heard the sound of a yawn. I'm sorry, said the Invisible Man, if I cannot tell you that all that I have done tonight, but I am worn out. It's grotesque, no doubt. It's horrible, but believe me, Kemp, in spite of your arguments of this morning, it is quite possible thing. I have made a discovery I meant to keep to myself. I can't. I must have a partner, and you. We can do such things, but tomorrow. Now, Kemp, I feel as though I must sleep or perish. Kemp stood in the middle of the room and staring at the headless garment. I suppose I must leave you, he said. It's incredible. The 3 things happening like this, overtuning all my preoccupations, would make me insane, but it's real. Is there anything more that I can get you? Only bid me good night, said Griffin. Good night, said Kemp, and shook his invisible hand. He walked sideways to the door. Suddenly, the dressing gown walked quickly towards him. Understand me, said the dressing gown. Oh, no attempts to hamper me or capture me. Or Kemp's face changed a little, I thought I gave you my word, he said. Kemp closed the door softly behind him, and the key was turned upon him forthwith. Then he stood with an expression of passive amazement on his face, and the rapid feet came to the door and to the dressing room that was too locked. Kemp slapped his brow with his hand. Am I dreaming? What, has the world gone mad, or have I? He laughed and put his hand on the locked door. Barred out of my own bedroom by a flagrant absurdity, he said. He walked up to the staircase, turned and stared at the locked doors. It's fact, he said. He put his fingers slightly to his bruised neck. Undeniable fact! But he shook his head hopelessly, turned and went downstairs. He lit the dining room lamp, got out a cigar, and began pacing the room, ejaculating. Now and then he would argue with himself. Invisible, he said. Is there such a thing as an invisible animal? In the sea, yes. Thousands, millions. All the larvae, all the naupili, all the tornarias, all the microscopic things, the jellyfish in the sea are more things invisible than visible. But I never thought of that before. And in the ponds, too. All those little pond things in life. Specks of colorless, translucent jelly. But in air? No! It can't be. But after all, why not? If a man was made of glass, would he still be visible? If his meditation became profound. The bulk of 3 cigars had passed through into the invisible or diffused and his white ash over the carpet before he spoke again. Then it was merely an exclamation. He turned aside, walked to the room, and went into his little consulting room into the gas there. It was a little room, because Dr. Kemp did not live by practice, and in it were a day's newspapers. The morning's paper lay carelessly opened and thrown aside, and he caught up, turned it over, and read the account of a strange story from Iping that the mariner from Port Stow and spelled over so painfully to Mr. Marvel. Kemp read so swiftly. Wrapped up, said Kemp. Disguised, hiding it. No one seems to have been aware of his misfortune. What the devil is his game? He dropped the paper, and his eye went seeking. Ah, he said, and caught up from the St. James Gazette, lying folded as it arrived. Now we shall get the truth, said Dr. Kemp. He rent the paper open, and a couple of columns confronted him. An entire village in Sussex goes mad, was the heading. Good heavens, said Kemp, reading eagerly in the incredulous account of the events of Iping in the previous afternoon. That have already been described. Over the leaf of the report of the morning paper had been reprinted. He reread it, ran through the streets, and striking right and left. Jaffers insensible, Mr. Huckster in great pain, still unable to describe what he saw, painful humiliation, Vicar, woman ill with terror, windows smashed. This extraordinary story probably a fabrication, too good not to print. Cum grano. He dropped the paper, stared blankly in front of him. Probably a fabrication. He caught up the paper again. He reread the whole business. But when does the tramp come in? Why does the deuce was he chasing a tramp? He sat down abruptly and on the surgical bench. He was not only invisible, he said, but he's mad, homicidal. When dawn came to mingle its pallor and with its lamp light and cigar smoke and of the dining room, Kemp was still pacing up and down, trying to grasp the incredible. He was altogether too excited to sleep. His servants, descending sleepily, discovered him, and were inclined to think that the overstudy had worked on his ill on him. Kemp read every scrap of the report and sent his Flows maid to get every one of his morning papers as she could. These also he devoured. He is invisible, he said, and it reads like rage going mania. The things he may do, and he's upstairs, free as air. What on earth ought I to do? For instance, would it be a bench of faith if no? He went on a little tidy desk on the corner and began to note, and he tore up his half-written and wrote another. As he read it over and considered it, and took an envelope and addressed it to Colonel Ide Portburdock. The Invisible Man awoke even as Kemp was doing this. He awoke in an evil temper, and Kemp, alert for every sound, heard the pattering feet rush suddenly across the bedroom overhead. Then a chair flung over and the wash hand stand tumbler smashed. Kemp hurried upstairs and rapped eagerly. Chapter 19. Certain First Principles. "What's the matter?" asked Kemp when the Invisible Man admitted him. Nothing was the answer. "But confound it, the smash?" "Fit of temper," said the Invisible Man. "Forgot this arm, it's sore." "You're rather liable to that sort of thing." "I am." Kemp walked across the room and picked up the fragments of broken glass. "All the facts are out about you," said Kemp, standing up with the glass in his hand, "and all that happened in Iping down the hill. The world has become aware of its invisible citizen. But no one knows that you are here." The Invisible Man swore. "The secret's out. I gather it was a secret. I don't know what your plans are, but of course I'm anxious to help you." The Invisible Man sat down on the bed. "There is a breakfast upstairs," said Kemp, speaking as easily as possible, and he was delighted to find a strange guest rose willingly. Kemp led the way up to the narrow staircase in the Belvedere. "Before we can do anything else," he said, "I must understand that a little more about what this invisibility of yours." He had sat down after one nervous glance of the window with the air of a man who was talking to his doubts of sanity of the entire business flashed and vanished again as he looked across where Griffin sat at the breakfast table, a headless, handless dressing gown, wiping unseen lips, miraculously held serviette. "It's simple enough, incredible enough," said Griffin, putting the serviette aside and leaning his invisible head on his invisible hand. "No doubt to you," but Kemp laughed. "Well, yes, but it seemed to me a wonderful start at first. But now, great God! But we will do great things yet. I came from on the stuff at first in Chelistow. I went there after I left London. You know I dropped medicine and took up physics. No? Well, I did. Light fascinated me. Optical density. The whole subject of is a network of riddles. The network with solutions glimmering exclusively, though, and being 220 of full enthusiasm, I said, I devote my life to this. This is a worthwhile. You know what fools we are at 22. Fools and then no, and fools now, said Kemp, as though knowing we could be any satisfaction to man. But I went to work like a slave, and I had hardly worked through about the matter 6 months before light came through, on which the meshes suddenly blindingly found a general principle of pigments of refraction, a formula, a geometrical expression involving 4 dimensions. Fools, common men, and even common mathematicians do not know anything of what general expression may mean to the student of molecular physics. In The books that Tramp has hidden, these are marvels, miracles. But this was not a method. It was an idea that might lead to a method by which would be possible without changing either property of matter, except in some instances of colors, to lower the refractive index of a substance, solid or liquid, to that of air, so far that as all practical purposes are concerned. Phew, said Kemp. That's odd, but I still don't see quite. But I can understand that thereby you can spoil a valuable stone, and personal invisibility is a far cry. Precisely, said Griffin. But consider, visibility depends on the action of the visible bodies of light. Either a body absorbs light, or reflects or refracts it, or does all these things. If it neither reflects, nor refracts, nor absorbs light, it cannot itself be visible. You see an opaque red box, for instance, because the color absorbs some of the light and reflects the rest, all the red part of the light, to you. If it did not absorb any particular part of the light, but reflected it all, then it would be shining a white box. Silver, a diamond box, would neither absorb much of the light nor reflect but much from the general surface, but just here from and there from the surfaces from the favorable light, it would be reflected and refracted. So that would be a brilliant appearance of flashing reflections and translucencies. Sort of a skeleton of light. A glass box would be not so brilliant, nor so clearly visible as diamond box, because there would be less refraction or reflection. See that? From certain points of view, you would see quite clearly through it. Some kinds of glass would be more visible than others. A box of flint glass would be brighter than a box of ordinary window glass. A box of very thin common glass would be hard to see in bad light, because it would absorb hardly any light and reflect very little. And if you would put a sheet of common white glass in water, it would still, if more you put in some denser liquid than water, it would vanish almost altogether, because the light passing from the water and the glass is only slightly refracted and reflected, and indeed infected in one way. It's almost as invisible as a jet or of coal or hydrogen as in air. And for precisely the some reason, as yes, said Kemp, is pretty plain sailing. And here's another fact that you will know is true. If a sheet of glass is smashed, Kemp, and beaten into powder, then it becomes much more visible while it is in air. It becomes at last opaque white powder. Then this is because the powdering multiplies the surfaces of the glass at which refraction and reflection occur. And the sheet of glass, there are only two surfaces, and the powder of light is reflected or refracted by the gain of the grain it passes through, and very little gets right through the powder. And if the white powder the glass is put into water, and forthwith vanishes, and the powdered glass and water have much more the same refractive index. That is, the light undergoes very little refraction or reflection in passing one another. You make glass invisible by putting it into a liquid of nearly the same refractive index, and transparent thing becomes invisible if you put any medium of almost the same refractive index. And if you don't consider only a second, you will see also a powder of glass that may vanish into air. If its refractive index could be made at the same time of air, for that would be no refraction or reflection as light passed through from glass to air. Yes, said Kemp, but it's a man, not powdered glass. No, said Griffin, he's more transparent. Nonsense. That from a doctor. How one forgets. How have you already forgotten your physics in 10 years? Just think of all the things that are transparent and seem not to be. Paper, for instance, is made up of transparent fibers, and the white and opaque is only for the same reason as the powder and glass and the white and opaque. The oil white paper fill up the interstices of between the particles with oil. There is so much no longer refraction or reflection except for surfaces. It becomes transparent as glass, not only but cotton fiber, linen fiber, woody fiber, and bone, Kemp, flesh, Kemp, hair, Kemp, nails and nerves, Kemp, the whole fabric of man except the red of his blood and the black pigment of hair are all made up of transparent, colorless tissue. Also, the little surfaces of makes us invisible to one another, and for most of the fibers of living creature are no more opaque than water. Great heaven, cried Kemp. Of course! I was thinking last night of the sea larvae and the jellyfish. Now you have me, and all of that I knew I had in a mind of the year since I left London, 6 years ago. But I kept it to myself. I had to do my work under frightful disadvantages. Oliver, my professor, was a scientific bounder, a journalist by instinct, a thief of ideas. He was always prying, and you know the knavish system of the scientific world. I simply would not publish, and let him share my credit. I went on working. I got nearer and nearer making my formula into an experiment. In reality, I told no living soul because I meant to flash my work upon the world as with crushing effect and become famous at blow. I took the question of pigments and filled certain gaps, and suddenly, not by design but by accident, I made a discovery in physiology. Yes? You know the red coloring matter of blood, it can be made white, colorless, and remain with all the functions it has now. Kemp gave a cry of incredulous amazement. The Invisible Man rose and began pacing with little study. You may well exclaim, I remember that night. It was late night. In the daytime, I was bothered with the gaping, silly students. I worked with them sometimes till dawn. It came suddenly, splendid and complete in my mind. I was alone. The laboratory was still, and with tall lights burning brightly and silently. With all my great moments, I have been left alone. One could make an animal and tissue transparent. One could make it invisible. All except pigments. I could be invisible, I said, suddenly realizing what it meant to be albino with such knowledge. It was overwhelming. I left filtering what I was doing. I went out and stared at the great window at the stars. I could be invisible, I repeated. To such thing would be transcendent magic, and beheld, unclouded by doubt, and magnificent vision of all that invisibility might mean to man. The mystery, the power, the freedom, drawbacks saw none. You have only to think that, and I, shabby, poverty-struck, hemmed and demonstrator, teaching fools in provisional college, might suddenly become this. I ask you, Kemp, if you, anyone, if I tell you, would have flung himself upon this research. I worked for 3 years, and every mountain of difficulty I toiled over showed another form of its summit. The infinite details, the exasperations, a provisional professor, always prying. What are you, when are you going to publish this work of yours? Was this everlasting question. And the students, cramped over by the means, 3 years of it had And after 3 years of secrecy and exasperation, I found it complete that it was impossible. Impossible. How? Asked Kemp. Money, said the Invisible Man, and went out again to stare at the window. He turned around abruptly. I robbed the old man. I robbed my father. The money was not his. He shot himself.
Chapter 20. At the house of the Great Portland Street. For a moment, Kemp sat in silence, staring at the back of the headless figure at the window. Then he started, struck by thought, arose, took the Invisible Man's arm, and turned away from the outlook. You are tired, he said, and while I sit, you will walk about. Have my chair. He placed himself between Griffin and the nearest window. For a space, Griffin sat silent, and then he resumed abruptly. I had left the Chesilstowe cottage already. When that happened, it was last December. I had taken a room in London, a large unfurnished room in a big, ill-managed lodging house in a slum near Great Portland Street. The room was soon full of the appliances I had bought with the money. The work was going on steadily, successfully, drawing near an end. I was like a man emerging from a thicket and suddenly coming to some unmeaning tragedy. I went to bury him. My mind was still on research, and I did not lift a finger to save his character. I remember the funeral, a cheap horse and a scant ceremony, a windy frost-bitten hillside, an old cottage friend who read the service to them, a shabby, black, bent old man with a sniveling cold. I remember walking back to the empty house through a place that had been once been a village. It was now patched and tinkered by jerry buildings into ugly likeness of a town. Every way the roads ran out and into the desecrated fields and ended rubble heaps and rank wet weeds. I remember myself as a gaunt black figure going along slippery, shiny pavement, and strange sense of detachment I felt from this solid respectability, the sordid commercialism of the place. I did not feel a bit sorry for my father. He seemed to be a victim of his own foolish sentimentality. The current can't requirement my attendance of his funeral, but I was not really my affair. But going along the high street, my old life came back to me for a space. How I met the girl I had known for 10 years since our eyes met. Something moved me to turn back and talk to her. She was a very ordinary person. It is all like a dream to visit the old places. I did not feel then that I was lonely, that I had to come out from the world into a desolate place. I appreciated my loss of sympathy, but I put it down in general inanity of things. Re-entering my room seemed like a recovery of reality. There were things I knew and loved. There stood the apparatus, the experiments arranged and waiting. And now there was a scarcely difficulty I let beyond the planning details. I will tell you, Kemp, sooner or later, all these complicated processes. We need not to go into that now. For the most part, saving certain gaps that I choose to remember are written in cipher, and those books and that tramp has hidden. We must hunt him down. We must go get those books again. But the essential phase was that to place the transparent object whose refractive index was to be lowered between the two radiating centers of a sort of ethereal vibration, of which I tell you will more of fully later. No, not those Roentgen vibrations. I don't know what these others of mine have been described, yet they are obvious enough. I had two little dynamos. And these I worked as cheap as a gas engine. My first experiment was with a bit of white wool fabric. It was the strangest thing in the world to see a flicker of flashes and soft and white, and then to watch it fade like a wreath of smoke vanish. I could barely believe I had done it. Put my hand into the emptiness. There was something. The thing was cold as ever. I felt in awkwardly. I threw it on the floor. I had a little trouble finding it again. And then came a curious experience. I heard a meow behind me, and turning, saw a lean white cat, very dirty, on the cistern cover outside the window. I thought in my head, everything ready for you, I said, and went to the window, opened it, and called softly. She came in, purring, and the poor beast was starving. I gave her some milk, all my food in the cupboard in the corner room. After she went smelling around the room, evidently the idea of making herself at home. The invisible rugs had upset her a bit. You should have seen her spit at it. But I made it comfortable on the pillow of my truckle bed, and I gave her butter to get her wash. You processed her? I processed her. But giving drugs to cats is no joke, Kemp. And the process failed. Failed? In two particulars. These were the claws and the pigment stuff. What was it? In the back of the eye in the cat, Tapeum. Yes, Tapeum. I didn't go. After I'd given the stuff to the bleach and done certain things to her, I gave the beast opium and put the pillow she was sleeping on the apparatus. And after all, she had faded and vanished, and there remained two little ghosts in her eyes. Odd. I can't explain. She was bandaged and clamped, and of course, I had her safe, but she woke while she was still misty, a mile dismally, and someone came knocking. It was an old woman from downstairs who suspected me of vivisecting. A drink-sodden old creature with only a white cat to care for in the world. I whipped out some chloroform, applied it, and answered the door. Did I hear a cat? She asked. My cat? Not here, I said very politely. She was a little doubtful and tried to pass me period into the room. Strange enough, to her doubt, bare walls, uncurtained windows, truckle bed, and a gas engine vibrating. To see the radiant points and faint, ghastly, stinging chloroform in the air. She had to be satisfied and last went away. How long did it take? Asked Kemp. 3 or 4 hours. The cat, the bones and the sinews fattened to last go, and the tips of his colored hairs, and as I say, the black part of an eye. Though the iridescent stuff wouldn't go at all. It was the night outside long before the business was over, and nothing was to be seen but the dim eyes and claws. I stopped the gas engine, felt and stroked the beast, which was insensible, and then, by being tired, left it sleeping on the invisible pillow and went to bed. I found it hard to sleep. I lay awake, aimless stuff, going over the experiment over and over again, or dreaming feverishly of things growing misty and vanishing about me, until everything, the ground I stood on, vanished. And so came on that sickly falling nightmare one gets. About 2, the cat began meowing about the room, and I tried to hush it by talking to it, but I decided to turn it out. I remember the shock I had striking the light, and there were round eyes shining in the green. Nothing round them. I would have given it milk, but I hadn't any. It wouldn't be quiet. I just sat down and meowed at the door, and I tried to catch it with the idea of putting it out the window, but I wouldn't be caught, and it vanished. Then it began meowing at different parts of the room. At last I opened the window and made a bustle. I suppose it went out last. I never saw any more of it. Fired the house. It was only the way to cover my trail, and no doubt it was assured. I slipped the bolts out from the door quietly and went out to the street. I was invisible. I was only just beginning to realize the extraordinary advantage of my invisibility gave me. I had my head was already teeming with plans of the wild and wonderful things in which I now had the impunity to do.